Here we go. All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome again to Tuesday. How are you feeling?
Waiting for Friday.
You're waiting for Friday. Ooh, it's gonna be a long wait. And I don't think there's any more long weekends, are there?
I think we have all Friday.
I don't know.
March something.
March something is a Pro D day.
Is it a Pro D day or a Pro day? It's a professional's day.
Professional development is what it is. So Pro D. If it is, it's not in my calendar.
Oh.
If it is, it's not in my calendar. Oh, we get April 2nd off. April 2nd is Good Friday. What's that?
It is a Good Friday. We get off.
I know. It's good for two reasons then, I guess, right? Okay, let's say hello to some people. So Basil's here. Good morning, Basil. Adila's here. Good morning. Adon is here. Hello, Adon. Michelle is here. Good morning, Michelle. And Irina's here. Good morning to you. And yes, that's who's here. Okay. So yesterday we started talking about, we tied up the loose ends around India, and we continued on with our next civilization, China. And I said that we'll look at kind of some of the same broad topics, or try to look at some of the same broad topics that we talked about in India in terms of culture and environment and politics and interactions and values and beliefs and cultural expressions and things like that. And so started off with a little bit of geography, right? And we said, we said that this is China. Actually, if anyone's interested, I used to work, my graduate research was all done right around here. So I spent a lot of time in that part of the world. Not really part of China, but it's on the map. What's that? No, I'm not. But I spent 6 summers there, so about a year total, and I learned to speak Russian a little bit, kind of probably at the level of a 6-year-old, but yeah, it was pretty cool. It was exciting. But anyway, so this is China, of course, and we said that China is a really big country, right? It takes up a lot of geographical space, and so there's a lot of different types of environments within China, right? So some of China is desert, some of it is sort of open steppe plains, some of it is very mountainous, right, because it borders the Himalayas to the south. Some of it is more temperate, some of it is sort of rainforest, tropical. So there's a lot of different types of environment within China, and you can kind of see that on the satellite map, right? You can see some different types of environment that exist. We said that civilization, just like in Mesopotamia and Egypt and in India, civilization developed around rivers, right? Specifically around the Yellow River in the north and the Yangtze further south. And we said around the Yellow River, people, began to sort of collect along the banks, started to dig irrigation canals and dikes, and water their crops and start to grow them, mostly wheat and millet, right? And so I said this is the sort of Yellow River Valley here that flows out to the China Sea, I believe. And you can see there's lots of ancient cities that are located along it, right? At least I think these are ancient ones. You can see that the Yellow River is called the Yellow River because of its very distinctive coloring. Again, I think it's the silt from the land around it that sort of makes it this kind of golden yellow color. I don't know, it's interesting. The Yangtze is further south, and the Yangtze is in a different part of China. It's more warm, it's more wet, it's more green, and of course people were farming rice in that area of China because, again, rice is a crop that likes things more wet. Wheat likes things drier, right? And so Here's the Yangtze River Valley here. You can see with lots of settlements alongside it. It exits into the China Sea closer to Shanghai rather than to Beijing. And here again, some pictures of Yangtze River Valley. So kind of a slightly different environment around the Yangtze. So there's some different kind of climatic effects here in China. As you can see, it's a temperate climate, so it can move from kind of warmer weather to colder weather. It has monsoons in the summer, so in the summer you get pretty heavy rains. And you have kind of warm and moist air coming from the southeast and moving to the northwest, but then you also have cooler, drier air coming from Asia, moving from the northwest, right? So you have two kind of different broad climate areas within China. Again, you've got wheat growing in the north part, rice growing in the south, and again, the cultivation of these crops is what allows Chinese civilization to develop. And so, again, if we go back around 4,000 years or so, we see kind of a very similar thing happening where we have political centralization, economic centralization, culture and society is becoming more complicated and complex, and yeah, we have the beginnings of a civilization. And very interestingly and probably unique to China is the fact that we have these dynasties, we have these lines of hereditary rulers where, you know, you have a king or an emperor, and then their son becomes emperor, and then their son becomes emperor or whatever. We have a series of these dynasties, and they stretch back thousands of years, and they go all the way until about 1911. So it's not until 1911 when the last emperor is overthrown, and a party called the Kuomintang becomes kind of the head of the Chinese government. And so this sort of span of Chinese empires goes really from the ancient world all the way to the modern one, which is unbelievable. That sort of long, kind of almost unbroken tradition of sort of political authority is really amazing. And it's something that doesn't happen, you know, imagine in Egypt if, you know, imagine Egypt had pharaohs all the way up to 1911. Great, well, maybe, but that's crazy, right, to think about that. But China had that situation where they had these rulers in place all the way up until the modern age, pretty much, which is incredible.
So can you consider them as the last emperor of the world?
Maybe. That's true. Yeah, she was never called an emperor, but I guess she could be thought of as the head of an empire. So yeah, maybe Queen Elizabeth II is the correct one, but still remarkable, right? Oh yeah, so here are some of these dynasties kind of laid out for us. And so you can see the timeline is actually so long that they have to snake it around the page here. And so you can see it starts, that's really small. I think that says about 5000 BC. You can't even see it on there. With the Xia. The Xia dynasty is kind of the first sort of dynasty of hereditary kings or rulers in China. And so it goes from the Xia to the Shang, and then to the Zhou, and then my head is in the way. The Qin is next, and then the Han, and then so forth. And so there's all of these dynasty after dynasty, and each dynasty is kind of a collection of hereditary rulers, right? Father, son, grandson, great-grandson, stretching, again, really all the way to, you can see the Republic of China here that is formed in 1911, and then People's Republic of China, which is the China we know today under created under Mao, right? Good morning. So we have a really long continuous history in China, which is, again, super interesting, and I don't think we have that tradition really almost anywhere else in the world, or in very few places anyway. Again, there's this is probably a little too much information for us, but it's saying that people lived in this area of China going back thousands of years, and so we do have evidence of hunter-gatherers living in this part of the world from about 10,000 or 12,000 years ago. But of course, people will eventually start to settle down and start to farm. The same kind of pattern we've seen in other parts of the world. There's some very early farming cultures, which again, this is probably a little bit too much detail for you. The Yangtze and the Longshan culture are early farming communities that exist in the Yellow River Valley, and they're kind of pre-dynastic. So they're before any of these kind of larger dynasties appear. Again, there's too much information there. I geeked out on it a little bit. So again, when we move to the 3rd millennium BC, so that's about 5,000 years ago, then we start to see more complicated things happening, right? So we see urbanization, we see people starting to collect themselves into towns, we see people start to build walls around their towns, and this will eventually lead to some more political centralization and kings, right, or eventually emperors. Again, the first states that seem to exist in China are these three: the Jia, the Shang, and the Zhou. There was originally, I forget where we are now, but there was originally some confusion about whether the Jia was actually a real collection of kings. So originally we weren't sure whether the Jia kings were real or if they were kind of mythical, if they were kind of made up. We weren't really sure, but the Shang seems to have been a real group of kings, and of course the Zhou as well. So the Jia is, or the Xia is mentioned in writings that we have from later periods, and there's some archaeological evidence as well. So here we can see it was regarded as a mythical construct, so people thought the Jia was imaginary. Turns out it is probably real, but again, we don't have any writing from this period. So what we know about the Jia culture and period comes to us based on what people wrote about it later on, which is always a little questionable, right? It's hard to know if they actually knew what they were writing about or if they were making it up, right? But the Jia will be replaced a little bit later by the Shang Dynasty. And so this is either the 2nd or the 1st dynasty of China, depending on where you want to start counting. So the Shang is interesting because we know a little bit more about it, but the Shang also has a number of technological developments that are noteworthy, and of course that will continue to be used for thousands of years after. So the Shang, I don't know if I have any pictures in here or not. Hopefully I do. The Shang were really good at casting things in bronze, and so we see statues and pieces of furniture and things like that that are cast in bronze, and they're really fantastic. I'll pull up let me just see actually if I have, I forget if I have pictures of Shang Bronzes or not. I do not. But let me just see here if I can search one up. It means that you get the liquid or you get the bronze into a liquid form, and then you pour it into a mold. And the mold will shape it. So it's kind of a complicated, here we go. It's kind of a complicated process because you have to carve the thing first, and then you have to make a mold of that thing, and then you have to break the mold open, take out the original, and then put the mold together and then pour in the bronze. And so it's a kind of a multi-step process, but you can see they're really good at creating some of these fantastic bronzes. And again, this is thousands of years ago that they're doing this. That's kind of cool. The owl. Lots of these kind of sort of containers here or pots. Really interesting stuff, and they're really good at it. So the Shang are very good at bronze casting, so they can actually, they've developed the technology to melt metal, so they can melt copper and mix it with tin to make bronze, and then they can pour it to create these things. They too have devised a calendar, just like many other civilizations, right? When you're farming, it's important to know the cycle of the seasons and the dates, and so the Chinese develop a calendar. We see some evidence of religious rituals, which I'll talk about in just a second. And again, this civilization develops writing as well, and so we see the first evidence of Chinese writing in Shang Dynasty. One of the interesting things about this Shang Dynasty is something called the Mandate of Heaven. Okay, and so the question is, and the question for all rulers is their legitimacy, right? So why are they in charge, right? So if we look at Justin Trudeau, why is Justin Trudeau in charge of Canada? He's been elected, right? That's what makes him a legitimate leader. That's his legitimacy. Justin Trudeau was elected to office, and he is the Prime Minister of Canada, right? What's the legitimacy of the Queen of England? Why is she in charge? Although she's not really, but let's just pretend she is. Yeah, she's part of the royal line, right? She was made queen because she was the next in line. There's a whole system of succession, and she's part of the royal family. And so, yeah, her legitimacy to rule is because of her family. She inherited the title of Queen of England, right? What about someone like, let's see, who can I choose? Well, what about Kim Jong-Un? Why is he in power? Huh? His dad was in power, right? Kim Il-sung, his father, was in power. And how did his father get into power? I don't think so. Are you making that up, or you're just guessing? I don't think he was. Martial law? Yeah, it's a dictatorship, right? He had the military behind him. Kim Il-sung had the military behind him, and at one point he had the Chinese government behind him. So he was able to take power because he had the military might, right? Why am I in charge? Well, because I got the guns, right? Don't quote the laws to me. I'm the one with the sword, right? So there's different ways to sort of achieve legitimacy of power. You can be elected, you can come from a royal family, you can simply take power because you have the military might to do so. And often in the ancient world, that's how power comes about, right? It's through military might. But here in the Shang Dynasty, the Shang rulers came up with this idea of the mandate of heaven, okay? So this is the answer to the question, well, why are you in charge, right? We had these Xia kings before, and now you've kicked those guys out, and now there's these Shang rulers, and you want us to sort of follow you and obey you. Why should we listen to you? Why are you the ruler and not the Xia anymore? And the Shang rulers came up with this idea of the mandate of heaven. So the idea that the ability to rule was given to you by heaven, by up there, right? And So you were in charge because the powers up there said that you were, right? So the idea here was that the Xia rulers were not in charge anymore because they had behaved badly, right? They didn't look after the people, they didn't honor the gods, they were just doing a bad job. And so the heavens took away that mandate to rule, the right to rule, took it away from the Xia and gave it to the Shang, okay? And so it's kind of a made-up concept, but I pointed out here because this is the first time it appears, and it will appear throughout Chinese history. So other dynasties will talk about the mandate of heaven, right? Those earlier kings that we kicked out, well, they lost the mandate of heaven, right? They were bad rulers, they weren't doing a good job. The mandate of heaven was taken away from those guys and given to us, and now we are the rulers. So it's kind of a concept for legitimacy that gets used first in Shang Dynasty and later in other dynasties as well. Okay. The other interesting thing we know about Shang Dynasty are the presence of these oracle bones. Do you know what an oracle is? Just in general? An oracle? Yeah. Oracles are sometimes associated with religious gods and things, but oracles are people who can see the future, or people who can know things, right? People who have access to a different type of information. And so you might call them, we might call them fortune tellers or psychics or, predictors of the future, or what? Or liars, if you're not into that sort of thing at all. You could call them any of those things, but that's what an oracle is, right? And if you have a question that you want the gods to answer, or you need to know what the future will be, you go to the oracle, right? And lots of ancient civilizations, and even some modern ones, have a version of oracles, right? If you need an answer to a question that you don't know how to answer, go to the oracle, and the oracle will provide guidance from heaven or from the gods or whatever, okay? And the Shang, they would ask questions through the oracle, and they would ask questions to either the gods or to their ancestors. And so, so they would ask this question, and then they would receive an answer from the oracle. And often, the question and the answer would be written on these bones, okay? And so, let me show you here. So this is one of them, and I think it's a shoulder blade bone. So it's a shoulder bone, I think, from a cow. And so you can see it's kind of got a large flat surface to it. And here you can see that they have written some of their questions and answers. So again, some of those, you would ask a question and the oracle would say, yes, it will rain, right? Will it rain? Will my crops be okay? Yes, it will. Or, if we attack this neighboring group, then the gods will assist us, right? So you can get answers to things. And so there's lots and lots of these oracle bones that have been found. And again, we've been able to decipher the text here, so we can actually read them, which is very helpful. And it tells us a little bit about the sort of religious and family systems in Shang Dynasty, right? It tells us a little bit about who the gods were. It tells us what people were asking for, right? And we know what's important to people because that's what they pray for, right? They pray for things that are important to them. And we also hear about the importance of and the worship of people's ancestors, right? So the role of ancestors is very important in, I think, modern Chinese culture, but that goes all the way back thousands of years, where ancestors are critically important to the lives of Shang Dynasty people. From the Shang Dynasty, we have those fantastic bronzes. We have the invention of writing. We have all of these oracle bones that tell us a little bit about the religious and family life of Shang Dynasty people. But they will be overthrown, again, about 3,000 years ago by the Zhou, right? And you can see here the Zhou are going to be in power for probably about 700 years or so, 650 or 700 years. Yeah, and so these two dynasties here, the Zhou, which we know quite a bit about, and the Qin that comes later, those two are, 2 to 3,000 years old, but they will form a lot of the basis of Chinese culture as it currently is. So just like if you remember India, those Vedic Aryans, those Indo-Aryans came into northern India, they kind of mixed with the indigenous Indians, and those ideas of Brahmanism and the Vedas and the Varna system, those things were kind of laid down in that period, and those things kind of became the foundation of Hinduism and Indian culture later on. And so something similar is happening here in China in the Zhou dynasty and the Qin dynasty period, where again the sort of the foundation of Chinese culture and language is being formed at this period 3,000 years ago. So that said, I have a little bit of reading for you to do, and it has to do with the Zhou. So I've kind of just briefly set up the Xia dynasty, which we don't know a ton about, to be honest. The Shang Dynasty, which we know a little bit more about, but we do know a lot more about the Zhou and about the Qin. And so we'll start here with the Zhou in terms of their sort of governance and how they ruled. We'll talk about kinship feudalism, which is important to know about, why that system of kinship feudalism failed, and we'll talk a little bit about the warring states period. So it just talks a little bit about politics and about history in this Zhou dynasty period. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of time to read, and then of course we will discuss what we've read. Okay, let's put some time on the clock here. I'm gonna put 10 minutes. That should be enough. Okay. Okay, hardworking people. I think it's time for a little break. So we'll take a break, we'll come back, and then we'll talk about Zhou kinship feudalism. Okay, and we are back. I'm sorry about the delay. Let's talk a little bit about what we've read here. And again, there's, just a little bit of history and political history, but I think it's worth kind of talking about these things just to set up how these later sort of dynasties will unfold. And so, what do these Zhou rulers do? So they overthrow the Shang ruler, and then they have three policies. What are three things do they do? Maybe three policies isn't quite the right thing, but
Establish another capital
Mhm.
for themselves in the north.
Right? So they establish a new capital. That's important, right? Because the only way to really communicate with, if you're going to rule a kingdom, the only way to communicate with people is to actually send people back and forth to tell people what to do, right? There's no mail, there's no email, there's no nothing, right? So you've got to actually be close enough to rule these people. So they move their capital. What else, or what do they do? What else do they do? What's that?
They establish another one.
Oh, they establish a second capital. Okay. Oh yeah, secondary capital, sorry. Right? Okay. Second thing.
They said they can all gods in us, we have to take over Shang. So you should follow us.
Right. So they issue a proclamation and they use the mandate of heaven, right? Which again should be a bit of a reminder from those characteristics of religion, right? There were 5 of them, and one of the things is that it allows you to either pass your decision making on to the gods, or it allows you to legitimize your own decisions, right? And the Zhou rulers are saying, yeah, the Shang rulers were not that great. They were corrupt and weak and incompetent, and the mandate of heaven was taken away, and it was given now to us, the Zhou. And so we will rule because of the mandate of heaven. So yeah, they tell people, hey, we're in charge now, and here's why. Good. They colonized?
That's what I understood from
I wouldn't say colonize, but actually they do use the word hegemony or hegemon. So what does that mean? Hegemony. Hegemony? I'm not really sure how it's pronounced. Hegemony? What does it mean? Yeah, it is something to do with power and hierarchy for sure. Yeah, that's kind of it. So if you have a hegemonic, geez, I can't say that word, hegemonic relationship with something else, that means like you're in charge, right? You have power over it. So a hegemon is someone who has power over something else, right? So I wouldn't say necessarily colonized, but I would say that they had hegemony over this area, right? So the Zhou kings were in charge of this area, and they got other people to do what they wanted to do. Sorry? H-E, is there a D? Oh boy. Spelling out loud, it's like my worst. H-E-G? M-O-N-Y. Nice. Nailed it. What was the third thing? They created a secondary capital, they issued a proclamation about the mandate of heaven, and then there was a third thing. That is the third thing? Oh, the hegemony thing is the third thing. Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, yeah. It says here that they dispatched royal kinsmen to strategically critical locations for the purpose of establishing colonies. Okay. I was kind of thinking colonization is a slightly different thing, but here they are setting up their own people in different parts of this kingdom, right, in order to rule it. So You can't count on, if you go 2 valleys over, you can't count on those people to do what you want. So you send your brother-in-law over there to rule, right? And your brother-in-law will give the orders and be loyal to you, the Zhou king. Right? So that kind of leads into this Zhou feudal. Yikes! What did I call it? Kinship feudalism. What's kinship feudalism? What's feudalism? Maybe we should start with that. It's an economic system and political system, and how does it kind of work? How does feudal? Okay, so you have a large territory with kind of divided authority. Okay, who are the authority figures? Yeah, relatives of the main king, sometimes dukes and earls and things like that, right? And how does it help? What else do we know? Divided authority, there's a bunch of royal family members, dukes and earls who are in charge. Yeah, they have a reasonable amount of independence, right? So within their little dukedom or fiefdom or whatever you want to call it, in their little area, they're kind of like a mini king. They're kind of in charge as long as they remain loyal to the real king, right? The main king. What about the peasants, the regular people? How does that work for them?
They work for the ruler.
Yeah.
For the ruler, and then they pay taxes from the things from their own farm.
Yeah, so really all the land is owned by this duke or earl or whoever it happens to be, right? So they own all the land, and the peasants, if they want to farm, they can farm on the duke's land, but they have to pay taxes to do so, right? So this duke or earl or whoever it is sits around collecting his taxes, being loyal to the king, and the peasants are working his land so that they can eat something, but also pay taxes, right? So yeah,
They work for them, then all of the farms they own themselves, they get taxed.
they don't own the farm. They only have permission to farm the duke's land. Yeah, and so that's kind of that's the power that the duke has over you, because if you don't pay your taxes, he'll cast you out. Well, he'll probably just execute you, but he'll cast you out, and then you won't have a farm anymore, and then you won't be able to eat, right? So if you want a farm and you want to be able to eat, you will work the duke or the earl's land. You will pay part of your harvest to that person, and then that person will allow you to continue to do so. Not bad, right? Then the duke just sits around, collects taxes, eats. That's about it. So yeah, that's kind of what feudalism is. So here with the Zhou, kinship feudalism, the Zhou have dispatched a bunch of royal family members to these, I guess we'll use the word colonies here. He's dispatched them to these new colonies, and so they're going to kind of be these dukes and earls, right? They're going to rule over the countryside however they see fit. They'll collect taxes from the poor peasants who have to farm on their land, and they'll remain loyal to the Zhou king, right? And probably have to send him tribute every once in a while too, right? Because the Zhou king needs money as well. But this system doesn't really last, right? Eventually it fails. Why does it fail? People has no tolerance for okay. The non-tolerance, okay. Mulder, what were you going to say? Why do they stop being loyal? Yeah, so this original Zhou kinship system was based on kinship, right? It was based on family, right? And so if Mulder's my cousin, for instance, and I'm the Zhou king, I'm going to send him out to the kingdom over the hill, and Mulder, you're going to rule over there as Duke Mulder. Duke Mulder, FBI. No, I don't know. So you're gonna rule over there, right? And you're going to stay loyal to me because we're related to each other, right? Mulder's my cousin. But what happens in a few generations when, the throne has passed like to my son and to my grandson and maybe to someone else, and the same thing, Mulder has been dead for a long time and his descendants have taken over that kingdom. Eventually, people aren't as close, right? It started out that Mulder was my cousin, but now the family tree has grown, and now the Zhou king probably doesn't even know who that person is, right? They have no connection anymore. And so eventually these kingdoms start to feel they have no tolerance, right? They want to be independent. They don't want to listen to the Zhou king. They want to do whatever it is they want to do, right? Because again, those things were based on family ties, on family connections, but over time, as the family tree kind of grows, those people become further and further apart, and they may not even really know each other, right, in a couple of hundred years. So I guess the answer of what happens after that is question 4, right? We enter the warring states period, a period where all of these little kingdoms that were set up now want to dominate the other ones, and so they start fighting amongst themselves. Who's going to emerge as the winner of these? The Qin, right? And is there a name of the ruler who overthrows? Is it Wu? Is it King Wu? Or am I remembering that from somewhere else? Oh no, it's Qin.
One.
What's that?
First one was it one two, two one two.
I'm not sure.
First.
I'm not sure. Either way, we have a Qin emperor or a Qin king, sort of ending the warring states period basically by conquering all of the other states, right? So we have one person who's able to defeat all of them and bring them all under his control. I wish I remembered his name at the moment. Okay, just give me 1 second here. Because I've come to the end of my slideshow and I just need to grab a few more. To grab a few more slides. It's funny, I thought that would take us a little longer to get through, so I thought that would be the end of class, but it's not quite there yet. Right. Right. That's what I want. Okay. So, good stuff. As we said, the Zhou overthrew the Shang, and they did 3 things. They established a secondary capital. They issued a proclamation saying that now they were in charge because of the mandate of heaven, those Shang kings. They didn't do a very good job until they lost the mandate of heaven. And again, they send a bunch of family members out to rule over small kingdoms within Zhou territory, right? Again, this is feudalism. We have a political and economic system characterized by fragmented authority. I feel like we looked up the same thing, Baha. And so, again, you have nobles that are owners of the land and allow the peasants to work on it. The peasants pay them taxes, and then the nobles promise to be loyal to the king and do what the king asks, right? But within their territory, they're kind of the boss, right? They're kind of mini kings, if you will. We said that this system failed over time, right? Because eventually people who were close family members, their descendants are kind of less and less well known to each other. And eventually there's no kind of family or kinship connection between these kingdoms, and they start fighting it out, right? They start battling for dominance. And eventually, after about 250 years, we finally have a Qin ruler who will take power, will bring all of those states under his control, and create a mini empire, if you will, a mini Chinese empire. Oh yes, that brings us to this man here. Who's heard of this guy? Yeah, what do you know about him?
He's a philosopher who tried to preach to the other things to do with
Confucius.
And that was the established of the world for Chinese government to spy on people.
Right. So yeah, there's a modern twist as well. Yeah, so Confucius is a philosopher, or Kung Fu Tzu, I think is his Chinese name. This is kind of the anglicized version of it, as far as I'm aware. But Confucius is a Chinese philosopher. He exists during, I think he exists during the Qin Dynasty, but he's around during the Warring States period as well. And so he's kind of someone who lives during this period and eventually kind of creates a philosophy that will help to organize how the Chinese state operates, but not at first. We'll see that he's going to be reasonably unsuccessful in his efforts to convince the Chinese kingdom or the Chinese rulers to embrace his philosophy. So he's going to be initially unsuccessful, but later on quite successful. Yeah, and currently there are schools that are kind of dedicated to or operate on Confucius Principles. And there's also some potentially questionable behavior happening too, which I think you mentioned, Mulder. What's that?
What do you try to do?
Confucius tried to, he was trying to figure out, I think I have a video to show you, but he was trying to figure out kind of how to live a good life and how to have a good society, right? How do you have a society that works for everyone? And that's a very old question, and it's a question that I think we're still asking today. I think you could probably agree, those of you who are in social justice or who were in social justice, that's kind of the same question that we're asking, right? How can we have a good society that works for everyone, right? We're asking that question in social justice now, and Confucius was asking kind of the same question, right? How do we have a good society that works for everyone?
He was trying to convince the rulers to change their way of ruling.
Yeah, in a way he was. But as I say, interestingly, at the time, no one was really listening to him. And so in a similar way, he gathered a group of people around him that were interested in what he was teaching. And this group, kind of like the Buddha, had a group of people around him that were interested in what he was teaching. And they tried to spread their ideas and tried to sort of convince rulers to adopt his principles. And again, in Confucius's lifetime, that didn't really happen. He wasn't successful. People didn't really want to listen to him. But fortunately for him, or at least maybe his ghost looking on from the other world or whatever, his ideas actually did become attractive later on to a later dynasty. And so a later dynasty adopts the ideas of Confucius and actually puts them into practice in a similar way to the way that Ashoka takes Buddhist and Jainist philosophies and puts it into the running of the state. And so Confucius's ideas will be added into the governance of the state as well, but after his death, unfortunately.
So which one came first?
Confucius or
Ashoka,
Ashoka? I think Confucius is earlier. I think he lives earlier, but they're not really in contact with each other in any way. So some of these, what's interesting about some of these developments is that, again, they're happening sometimes at the same time and sometimes at different times, but in totally different parts of the world among people who aren't connected to each other, right? And so, you've got Ashoka borrowing from religious philosophy to learn how to run a state. Here, Confucius does something similar, actually borrowing from earlier religious tradition to create ideas to govern a state. And again, it takes a while for those ideas to catch on. You have people in India who are trying to figure out the nature of the self and the universe, and so they look inward. And then you have people in Greece who are trying to figure out the nature of the self and the universe, and they're looking outward and doing kind of scientific things. And it's really interesting how, eventually all societies kind of come around to these ideas, right, about who are we, why are we here, how does the universe work, how should we live together, right? How do we run a society or a state? And they all kind of figure out slightly different answers to them, right? They have different answers to these questions. But what's really interesting is that in some ways people are asking the same questions. And I think you might agree, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't, but that we're still asking those questions today, right? Who are we? Where do we come from? What is the significance of our life? How does the universe work, right? That's what physics is all about, right? Trying to figure out how the world works. How do we live a good life? How do we have a good society that works for people? How do we govern a state, right? Those are all questions that I think we're still trying to answer thousands of years after Confucius or Ashoka or Buddha or Socrates or Aristotle or Plato, right? All of these questions kind of continually come up, and societies have to find a way to answer them. And so, but it's very interesting that they come up almost as soon as people start to live in large groups, right? As soon as people start to live in larger cities, larger kingdoms, they start to ask these questions about how do we do this, right? How do we create a system where we can cooperate?
All their needs are satisfied, so they look for self-actualization.
Oh, you're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Could be, right? Maybe that's true on a societal level. Maybe not so much on a personal level, but in terms of looking at all of society and applying that pyramid to them. Yeah, once they're able to gain food and security, and then it's a process of society trying to self-actualize. What does that mean, self-actualize? Finding meaning? What do you think? Has anyone ever heard that term before? Self-actualize or self-actualization? Yeah, I think that's what it is, right? Is becoming, how do you become the best version of you? How do you become the ideal you, right? And yeah, I think that's what these societies are doing, right? They're asking, how how do we become an ideal society? How do we become the best society that we can be? That's actually a good comparison. What caused you to connect those two? It just happened? Yeah. It's not a bad insight, actually. I think it's not a bad insight to connect those two and to say that, yeah, once societies start to meet their more basic needs and they are set, then they start to look at more complicated ones. And again, maybe not on a personal level, but on a group level. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Does anyone else have some really smart things to say? Because that's one. Confucius, or the nature of society, or the nature of history, or the nature of humanity? There are people who
Tries to control whatever they have, even though they have the best, are always
people who are not satisfied.
so each there's a lot of people in this.
It's true, right? There are people in every society and in every era who are troublemakers, right? They speak out against the status quo. They see the way things are and they say, hey, we can do better, or we shouldn't be doing this. We should do something different, right? Yeah, there's always people like that. Can you think of modern people who are like that? People who are trying to change the world, shake things up.
But we're not in a perfect world like this.
Huh?
We're not in a perfect world like
No. But there's always people who are.
this. Like, for example, us Syrians.
Yeah, not a
So we tried.
not a perfect world.
We tried to change something.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
I think
That didn't go well.
not
It's not over.
hopefully it's over.
Yeah. For many people, I guess it probably is, right?
Some of us we live.
Yeah.
There is still not a lot of mounting and fighting, but people can't do it.
Yeah.
You need to live with £1 million, at least, a month.
Yeah.
And you like the employee gets 50,000.
Yeah.
One person said, "Oh, we forgot about something for
It's. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something kind of intelligent to respond to you with, but I don't know that I have anything. I mean, it's one of those things where, yeah, like sometimes you would hope that you would, like you would have a bad situation in your country, and then the people try to make it better, and you would hope that they would, right? You would hope that they would be successful in doing that, but.
You're always good, but some strange hands
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's the other thing about history, is that you never really know how things are going to turn out, right? Sometimes you have strange things that happen, and then what should have come out one way, in fact, comes out the opposite.
Try to say something intelligent and good, but there's nothing else to say except for this. Very good, I want to just be good.
Yeah.
We like maybe I would be Chinese ruler They work for them and they beat us and then we pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah, like a return to some weird form of modern feudalism, right? Yeah. Nobody wants that. That's tragic though. That's yeah. I don't know what to say about that. Okay. Well, maybe on that note, depressing as it might be, but we'll end it there. Tomorrow, come back. I have a video to show you on Confucius and his life and what kind of things he was thinking and where he got some of his ideas and how they were sort of created and then transmitted into Chinese culture, because they still are, there's still a factor in Chinese culture today. So it's worth exploring what this man's ideas are. So until then, that is it. I will see you tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon. Yes, goodbye.